online. And Boker Tov.
Okay, Tov.
No.
How are folks doing? We get to start out. We'll do one of our number is texting me. Sorry, I have to get in mindset for this. We get started out. We're gonna hit chapter 9 and following, maybe of Daniel today. I feel like there might be 2 weeks left in this. We based on the pace that we're going at, and for those who are interested, I'm going to on Shabbat afternoons, the first 3 Shabbatot in June. I want to do a book group on a book called Catch 67 by Micha Goodman. Partly I was reading it, and then when the fighting in Israel and Gaza broke out, it hit me that this was a book that was dealing with specifically how to sort of like conceive of or frame these issues. It is obviously a tragic and sad situation, and I think it is, and Goodman is a centrist and has a good sense of helpful ways to frame the issue, given the certain important aspects of it, which is to say, to make sure that we have a strong sense of the security and safety of the state of Israel, and at the same time have a strong sense of ensuring that Palestinians have human rights as well, and trying to find a way to achieve, try and find a way, how can these things best be achieved? So it's I think it'll be a good chance for discussion and the like. So that's coming up. There'll be Shabbats in June. Catch 67 by Micha Goodman. And with that, I think we get to dive right in. Others? It is, by the way, obviously, the situation in and around Israel is a difficult and distressing. Many people, every so often I get asked, I think sticking with Israeli media tends to give a fuller view than American or international media tends to. All right. The bracha for Torah study is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu v'sitav v'tivanu asok b'divrei Torah. And before we actually get to chapter 9, I keep zipping back to chapter 7 because I keep seeing references to what we see in chapter 7 as essential for understanding early Christianity, or essential to understanding how early Christians or Jews who became followers of Jesus could have conceived of it. And the important lines are in chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, which is, this is Daniel's vision, and Daniel says, and I'm going to read from a Protestant translation, so it might be a little clearer. As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being, or sometimes like in King James translated, I saw the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. And that gives, that image is what gives, is what some suggest is a hint that even the author of Daniel, writing, in 160s BCE, is had a sense of an old god, and then like as it were an assistant younger god. Daniel Boyarin, one scholar who writes on this, thinks, and I'm not sure, I don't agree with him, but I'll pass along his view anyway. Thinks that if Israelite religion grew in part out of Canaanite religion, where there was a sort of like overall God that like dealt with most things, El, and then there was a junior younger storm god that sort of like was running around doing some of the doing the stuff that required more energy, Baal. That Israelite religion took those two gods, the overall god and the younger assistant god, and combined it into the one. So there's one god. And that Daniel, as it were, is showing that is either breaking them apart again or showing that not everyone had bought into the program. And that's this image. I saw one like a human being coming from the cloud, coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and the glory and kingship, right? Like, so that's so he thinks that this is an echo, and this, I think there's too much time in between for his theory to be correct, is my critique of it. Like, the Canaanites are way back, and obviously this is being written, Daniel's written, 1,000 or 1,500 years after the Canaanites are off the scene, like a lot of time. Like the thinks that there's an image of like old like important God, and then essentially young assistant. And he thinks this is an image of old master God, young assistant, and that Jesus is essentially grafting himself onto this pattern that that Jesus is then claiming to be part of that dyad of these two gods, and that Jewish readers of the book of Daniel will be like, oh, this is like that. This is why you're claiming that, is because you're saying that you're this one who looks like a human, who really is the God who is assistant of God, but appears as a human. So he thinks that those two lines in Daniel are like the key to understanding how early Jews could have been convinced of Jesus's status.
How is this compared to the Mashiach from Isaiah?
Well, here, notice it's different, right? In this conception, if this is correct, it's two different visions of God. It has nothing to do with Mashiach. Mashiach is something else entirely in Isaiah. Like, again, Christianity obviously melds those, but there's no, but Isaiah is, if one were to read this as non-monotheistic, right, as having these two gods, Isaiah never goes down that road and never gets too close to that road, right? Isaiah is pretty intense otherwise. Isaiah is like sort of clearly speaking of a human king. This sort of clearly is not speaking of a human being. It's one with the appearance of a human being who is something else. Now, the traditional Jewish read, and probably the correct read, is that it's an angel, right? That Daniel is talking about, not a god, but an angel, right? So Isaiah is speaking of a person, a king, not an angel. Even in this, like in this like modern Protestant commentary that I read the translation from, the commentary is, God will then give the one like a human being universal and everlasting dominion. This figure represents the faithful Jews and should probably be identified as the archangel Michael, although he was traditionally identified as the Messiah. The traditionally identified they're referring to is in Christian tradition, but they're saying that the actual author probably is thinking of an angel, and we'll see as we continue going on. Daniel has angels zipping around and about.
Rabbi, I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
You said that early Jews might have, some of them interpreted this as granting Jesus
Divinity
as the Son of God, and been more likely to follow it because of that. But isn't my understanding is that Jesus' divinity was not established until 428 AD, or Common Era, by this conclave or this conference of the, I forgot what the name is, in France or something like that, where the bishops got together and they decided on a few things, including the uniform agreement that Jesus was divine. So the divinity of Jesus wasn't established in Christianity for 400 years.
No, so I'm going to disagree with you. It was not an article of faith among Orthodox, so to speak, lowercase o, Christians until the Council of Nicaea. That
Right.
doesn't mean it wasn't a belief that was held before that time.
I see.
Meaning that they don't make it up out of thin air. They say this position, among the many that are out there, is the official position.
They put their stamp of approval on it.
Right, you're right. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't present from before that point. Hold on a second. We still have somebody who was trying to get in. All right. Hold on. I have to find the email for this and send it to people.
Is it possible to send that Zoom link out, to have somebody send that Zoom link out every week?
That's what yeah. That's what I'm trying to do now.
Because I also have to go looking for it. Sometimes I find it, sometimes I don't.
Right. Yes, it is. I will ask for it, but right now I'm going to try to.
Sandy, Sandra, let me make this is Morn. Let me make a suggestion. I have the same issue. You can probably make folders in your email. Dorit ought to what she did was send me the link for the morning, the evening, and Pirkat Avot in one email. And I save it in a folder.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And that way, if anything gets forgotten during the week, we're not screwed up. You put it in a folder and grab it from there all the time.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you, Norm.
No, I actually have, oddly enough, how are these? So weird. I put it in my calendar and just copied and pasted the link into my calendar. Right, because it wasn't in the email this week. Right. And this is why this happens, because it doesn't go on for a while.
I think Dorit, when she sends out her mock array, if that's how it's pronounced, she has them all in there weekly.
Is not right. It often is, and sometimes it slips through.
Uh,
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
That's why you want to, that's why you want to hold it in a separate, once you got it, you want to hold it in a folder. So it just, that doesn't happen.
all right. There we go.
I have another question, Rabbi.
Yes.
So if we go back to the first day of Shavuot, where I took the opportunity to read through Ezekiel through the Haftorah in English, that is.
All right. So it's barely understandable in English, so don't worry. So
Right. So my question is, as opposed to you talking about how the Daniel vision was geopolitical, I'm assuming Ezekiel's vision is generally interpreted as metaphysical or supernatural or something
he's
other than geopolitical.
Correct. What happens here is that this is right. This is sort of like, this is expressly geopolitical. Like, I saw this beast, and then the angel said that beast represents this kingdom, right? Ezekiel is, I mean, part of the reason I teach these classes is because no one reads Daniel, no one reads Ezekiel, and that includes rabbis. So like, I don't want to like say too much because I'm not like so expert in Ezekiel, but he's talking about the Israelites reestablishing themselves, and it's a more localized vision that he has. Maybe that's the way of putting it. It's more localized as opposed to Daniel, which is a little bit more regional.
But I have to assume that his visions are something that is considered to be by the commentators, because I actually looked it up and I couldn't find very many Jewish commentaries on it. And I didn't want to read the Christian commentaries because as I scanned some of them, they were totally, each of the four faces were the Gospels, and I didn't want to go there. So, but I'm assuming that in general, the Jewish view is that this is a hyper spiritual kind of not to be really understood revelatory experience on the part of Ezekiel.
Yes. Well, there are two things going on there. One is note, even like when you're reading it, which is to say, wait, that was the Haftorah for the first day of Shavuot. So what's it doing there, right? Like if Shavuot is marking when God revealed God's self to the people, well, that's why Ezekiel is there, because it's a revelation of God, right? Meaning like, so it is this express thing. Of an actual revelation, like Mount Sinai, right? The Torah reading is the 10 Commandments, the Haftorah is Ezekiel. So there's that. And there's a tradition of you shouldn't talk about it that much or think about it that much. And in the Talmud, there's a scene where they argue about whether or not Ezekiel should be included in the Tanakh or cut out of it, right? So And instead Rabbi Akiva came and like, I think it's Akiva, like saved Ezekiel from being left on the cutting room floor. So this. One other significant difference between the two is the timing, right? Ezekiel seems to be writing somewhere maybe around the 570s BCE, and Daniel, of course, as you say, is written in in Hasmonean times, like the 160s BCE. So there's a few hundred years between the two. All right, now we're gonna dive back in the chapter 9 of the book of Daniel. By the way, the exciting parts of Daniel, one of them is that reference in chapter 7, the sort of thing that's important in understanding sort of like how can Christianity sort of like base itself be like well based in Judaism, and those lines in Daniel are important to that. Daniel 7, 13, 14, whatever it was, like the much more so than the Messiah stuff, and much more so than certainly the young woman will give birth and they shall, like, this is like, because the Daniel stuff is wilder, so it sort of lends itself to a more heterodox interpretation. And of course, for many modern Jews, if the Daniel has a lot of angels flying around in it, and modern Jews can sometimes be uncomfortable with the idea of angels, and angels, on some sense, like are feel like a little bit of a monotheistic cheat, right? Like if there's us and there's God, like what are these like sort of like in between things doing, zipping around? So, chapter 9. In the first year of Darius, son of Ahasuerus, from the seed of Media, who was made king over the king of the Chaldeans. So this is a Ahasuerus. As Alter notes, Ahasuerus is not the father of Darius, but appears to be plugged in because he has a familiar Persian royal name. JPS in the Jewish Study Bible says Ahasuerus is Xerxes, like Darius a Persian and not a Mede, and was a son, not the father of Darius. So again, not a historical point that the author is making here. Sort of indicates that he may be writing from something of a distance, but it's the relationship between Ahasuerus and Darius, I think that makes is why they identify Ahasuerus with Xerxes. Now, is that the same guy as in the Purim story? Again, it's not a historical point. First year of Darius, son of Ahasuerus, from the seed of Media, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans in the first year of his reign. I, Daniel, came to understand in the books of the number of years that according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah, the prophet, word to fulfill the devastation of Jerusalem, 70 years. So couple of things. One, again, as Alter notes, when he says the books, it's really one book. It's Jeremiah that he's thinking of. When the Jeremiah says that the Israelites will serve a foreign king for 70 years before being restored, which is, of course, how it indeed plays out. Also, as Alter notes, this is a rare use of God's name, which is to say, God being referred to by the Tetragrammaton, by Yud He Vav He, occurs here, and a couple more times in this chapter, just less than 5, I think, in chapter 9, and nowhere else in Daniel. So God's name as God's name, like sort of the most common name of God, the Yud He Vav He, appears a handful of times here in chapter 9, but generally not in Daniel at all. They'll always use different words for God, often. So just a point that sometimes could be missed when reading it in translation. But again, whenever, for most translations, when the Yud He Vav He is translated as Lord. And if it doesn't say Lord, then it's not Yud He Vav He in the Hebrew. So according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, we're to fulfill the devastation of Jerusalem 70 years. Verse 3, and I turned to the Master God to petition in prayer and supplication and fasting and sackcloth and ashes. Like the so that's Master is then Adonai in the Hebrew, right? So when we say Adonai, we're saying it as a substitute for God's name, Yud He Vav He. This is Adonai spelled out. So it's this is Adonai Elohim, which when we say Adonai Elohim, and like when reading a Haftarah, it's because there are two, because God's name and Elohim are back to back. This isn't that. This is the word spelled out, as it were. So that's why Alter translates it as master, which is an accurate translation, right? Like the when we say Adonai, it's like saying my master. So. I turned to the Master God to petition, prayer and supplication, fasting and sackcloth and ashes. And I prayed to the Lord my God, again, God's name, and confessed and said, O Master, great and fearsome God, who keeps the covenant and faithfulness for those who love him and keep his commands. We have offended and done wrong and acted wickedly and rebelled and swerved from your commands and from your statutes. That, by the way, as Alter also note, is copied and pasted into the Yom Kippur liturgy, meaning that that sort of like turn of phrase that we get there also is part of what we get on Yom Kippur. Uses the same phrasing, and obviously there's a fasting and wearing different clothes and so on and so forth that is associated with Yom Kippur. We get the Hebrew on that. It's verse 4. Right. Chatanu v'avinu, hirshanu, moradnu, sod mitzvotecha mishpatecha. Right, like the like literally copied and pasted into the Shamnu v'gadnu. Verse 6, and we have not heeded your servants, the prophets, right? Lo shamanu alavdecha neviim she'edibru, right? Like so bishmecha, like the again, same phrase lifted into the liturgy. So not just so we talk about like it was when the first part of the class talking of how the book of Daniel is significant in later Christian thought. Obviously, this part is significant to later Jewish thought in that it becomes part of the annual liturgy. And swear from your commands, from your statutes. So we have not heeded your servants, the prophets who spoke in your name to our kings, our nobles, our fathers, and to all the people of the land. Verse 7, yours, O Master, is righteousness, and ours the disgrace. The men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem and all Israel, far and near in the lands to which you have driven them for their betrayal that they committed against you. Right? Like the so again, like you feel like the standard what will later be rabbinic theology here, and certainly biblical theology. If something bad happens to you, it's because God wanted it to. God is in control not just of your own life, as it were, but also like sort of like, again, the international sense of it all. The Jews are exiled, other nations triumphed in war because of our sins, right? We don't, this is Deuteronomy and like sort of consistent throughout everything after Deuteronomy. Like when you violate the mitzvot, God will punish you collectively. You yourself may escape harm because your sins are accounted to the Jewish people, not just to you as an individual. Verse 8, ours are the same, O Lord, our kings, our nobles, and our fathers, we have offended you. Verse 9, to the master our God, our compassion and forgiveness, for we have rebelled against him, right? We have sinned. We deserve what we got. We're not saying anything different. And you, God, are compassionate and forgiving. Like this echoes the scene from Exodus 34, and that we say on holidays like on Shavuot, the 13 attributes we say before the open ark. Verse 10, and we have not heeded the voice of the Lord our God to walk in his teachings that he set before us through his servants, the prophets. And all Israel have violated your teaching and swerved away, not heeding your voice. And the curse and the imprecation written in the teaching of Moses, servant of God, poured down upon us, for we have offended him. Right, and this is, at the end of Leviticus, and then and at the end of Deuteronomy, there are these long sections of tochacha, of rebuke. If you don't follow the mitzvot, horrible things will happen to you, and I will kick you out of the land. I'm taking you in the Torah. It says, the teaching of Moses, Torah Moshe. I'm taking you to the promised land and giving this land to you. And if you violate the terms of the lease, I will take it away from you. It is promised, but on condition. So this is saying, God has not broken his covenant with us. We have broken our covenant with God, and so God is invoking the clause of taking the land away. There's no termination to the covenant, just a termination of the you get to live in the land part. The verse 12, and he fulfilled his word that he had spoken concerning us and concerning our judges who judge, to bring upon us great evil, which has never been done under all the heavens, as was done against Jerusalem. So again, it's not that the Babylonians or the Persians' gods are stronger. There is only one God, but that one God is punishing us for our lack of loyalty. And as Alter notes there, like this is hyperbole. That was done upon us great evil, which has never been done under all the heavens, as it was done against Jerusalem. Like not really. Like, this happened to lots of places, right? Like the kingdom of Israel was wiped out worse. Other nations, their capital falls and their temples get destroyed and their people get sent to exile. It's not like it only happened to us, but he speaks as if it were, because when it happens to you, that's how it feels. As is written in the teaching of Moses, Torah Moshe, all this evil came upon us, yet we did not entreat the Lord our God to turn from our wrongdoing and to find wisdom in your truth, right? Even though we sinned and you punished us, we didn't turn back. And the Lord was exacting about the evil and brought it upon us. For the Lord our God is righteous in all his acts that he has done, but we did not heed his voice. And now, O Master our God, who brought your people out from the land of Egypt with a strong hand and made a name for yourself as on this day, we have offended, we have acted wickedly, right? Again, like well-grounded in Torah and well-grounded in what will later, and grounding for the future Yom Kippur liturgy. This also, like you feel like this is language very reminiscent to the book of Deuteronomy, as opposed to, for comparison, like when you read Samuel and Kings, they don't refer to the Torah so much, right? They tend not to invoke the covenant and like the specifics of the Torah in the book of Samuel. This is much later, after the Torah is canonized and after the Torah sort of like has a status like it does now. Even if the rest of the Bible isn't completed yet, obviously, because Daniel's still speaking, the Torah was already completed and already had its status as Torah for many, many, many centuries. So, which wasn't the case back when Samuel was being written or taking place. So like this, you feel it has a whole different attitude towards Torah as canonized Holy Writ. Verse 16, O Master, by all your righteousness, let your wrath pray and your fury turn back from your city, Jerusalem, your holy mountain. For through our offenses and through the wrongdoing of our fathers, Jerusalem and your people are a disgrace all around us, right? Save us, because it makes us and you look bad. 17, and now listen, God, to the prayer of your servant and to his supplications, and let your face shine upon your desolate sanctuary for the sake of the Master. Again, this feels very reminiscent of sort of a Yom Kippur style liturgy. Bend your ear, my God, and listen. Open your eyes and see our desolation in the city on which your name is called. For not because of our righteousness do we pour out our supplication before you, because of your great compassion, right? We don't deserve it, but we know you're forgiving. So please forgive. This, again, very influential in the later Yom Kippur liturgy. O Master, listen. O Master, forgive. O Master, hearken. And do not delay for your sake, my God, for your name is called on your city and your people. So long prayer on Daniel's part. And this is, again, that's a long quote, and that's his long prayer. I was still speaking and praying and confessing my offense and the offense of my people Israel, and pouring my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God. And I was still speaking in prayer when the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision before, glided down in flight, reaching me at the hour of the evening offering. Gabriel, of course, is not a man. Gabriel is an angel. But he has the form of a man, just like in the quote I gave from chapter 7, like the angel or whoever is seated at the right hand of God has the form of a human being. So and as angels throughout, even in the Torah and throughout the Tanakh, aren't like the images and paintings, but look like human beings and can't be told apart, right? The angels that Abraham sees, famously in the announcing that Sarah will give birth, he doesn't recognize as angels until much later. Mrs. Manoah, Samson's mother, doesn't recognize the angel as an angel until later, right? Angels always seem to appear as something else. The difference here, by the way, is Gabriel, one, has a name. So as we mentioned, Daniel is the only place where angels are going to be named in the Tanakh, and he flies in. Right? He's in flight, or something. Angels haven't flown in before. Usually they're ground-based, right? In the Samson Annunciation scene, when Mrs. Manoah in Judges, when she and her husband talk to the angel, he ends up his encounter by flying up into the air or by beaming up into the air in a sacrifice. But here's the first time that an angel sort of flies in. Does JPS translate the same way on that? Verse 21 of chapter 9. When I was uttering my prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had previously seen in the vision, was sent forth in flight and reached me about the time of the evening offering. Yeah. Gabriel flies in. Again, unusual for the Tanakh. Verse 22, and he imparted understanding and spoke with me and said, Daniel, now have I come to convey wisdom to you. At the beginning of your supplication, the word was issued, and I have come to tell you that you are beloved, says the angel of God to Daniel. And discern the word and understand the vision. Here's the vision that he's going to be given because he prayed so nicely. 7 weeks of years I decreed for your people to work out the crime and finish offenses and to atone for wrongdoing, and bring everlasting justice, and to seal vision and prophecy, and to anoint the Holy of Holies, right? So 7 weeks of years, i.e. 49 years, just like we just finished before Shavuot, 7 weeks of days, 7 weeks of years. Same phrase is used in Parshat Bahar for the Jubilee. And you know and understand 7 weeks of years from the issuing of the word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed prince. And in 62 weeks of years, it will once more be built, square and moat, but in a time of distress. And after the 62 weeks of years, the anointed one shall be cut off with none to save him. And the troops of a prince who comes shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, but his end shall come in a sudden rush till the end of the decreed war, desolation. And he shall make a strong pact with many for 1 week of years, and for half a week of years. He shall put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And in his place there shall be a desolating abomination until the decreed destruction is poured down on the desolating thing. All right. So, what is this? The goal is, it seems in this vision, to get us to the events of Antiochus destroying or profaning the temple in Jerusalem, right? So the Alta's comment on this is that the midway through his comment, Jeremiah's 70 years, which would approximately mark the time spent from the moment of his prophecy to the beginning of the return to Zion, is transformed into 490 years, 70 weeks of years, 70 times 7. Still not an exact number, but bringing the elapsed time to just a few decades after the date of 167, when this vision is enumerated. So biblical Hebrew, with its attachment to formulaic numbers, uses numerical indications only approximately, which is to say, if Daniel is set in the time of the exile after the destruction of the first temple, this prophecy says that the temple is going to be rebuilt, and then in about 500 years, it's going to be profaned and made desolate again. And that's what brings you close to the time when this is actually being written, the time of the Maccabees, right? So this is sort of, again, like retrojecting the story back to, and Daniel now is predicting that the temple will be defiled, and he gives a date to it, and the date is roughly not exactly the time when it in fact happens under Antiochus, right? And then it says the anointed one here, Mashiach, being the king, right? Who's the king? The king is Antiochus. Antiochus has been anointed as king elsewhere, not a Jewish king, but a king. And so this verse 26, or 25, he'll be cut off with none to save him. That's the oh, sorry, my mistake. The first anointed one is Onias III, the Kohen, murdered by Antiochus' troops, and then the next character is Antiochus himself. The anointed one, priests also anointed, cut off the none to save him. That's the last of the Zadokite line of priests. And the troops of a prince who shall destroy the city, that's Antiochus, and the sanctuary, but he shall come with a sudden rush until the end of the decreed war desolation. He shall make a strong pact for many for 1 week of years. That's Antiochus allying with the Hellenizing Jews, the Jews who wanted to imitate the Greeks. And for half a week of years, he shall put a stop to the sacrifice and grain offering. That's a 3.5 years that the temple doesn't function, that the Maccabees have to then reclaim, right? And in its place there shall be desolation, abomination, until the decreed destruction is poured down on the desolating thing. That's God redeeming the temple through the Maccabees. Pause. So that's Daniel's vision. Daniel's vision is one of putting into Daniel's mouth hundreds of years before the events surrounding the desolation of the temple in Maccabean times. So that it is so in these books, they're put forward as predicting the future, as it were, though it seems to be the case that they that rather than predicting the future, it's just it's changing the setting so it looks like they're predicting the future. This makes sense. All right, so that's Daniel's other vision. So I will confess, like, this is all leading up to the exciting thing comes in chapter 12, which is the last chapter of the book. But chapter 12 is what everything is building up to. But still, you feel like this has a different flavor than the rest of the Tanakh. No one's asking anything. I'm moving on to chapter 10. Going once. Now we get a different vision. Chapter 10 is, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, whose name had been called Belshazzar. And the word was true and the service great, and he understood the word and had an understanding of the vision. Right? This is sort of like a third-person narrator stepping in. A different time. Again, it doesn't feel totally historic. The 3rd year of Cyrus is 536 BCE, according to the JSB. Now he has to prepare for his vision. At that time, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. No fine bread did I eat, nor meat and wine came into my mouth. I was careful not to rub myself with oil until the 3 weeks are over. Right? So like after he gets a vision saying that God's going to speak with you, he spends 3 weeks preparing himself. Not having rich foods and not anointing himself with oil. That's like rubbing. That's rubbing oils into your skin the way you might think of with special creams that people use for their skin to make their skin feel nice. This is what he's saying he's not doing. Verse 4. On the 24th day of the 1st month, I was by the great river, which is Tigris. I raised my eyes and saw, and look, there was a certain man dressed in linen, and his loins were girt with pure gold, and his body was like chrysolite, and his face like the look of lightning, and his eyes like fiery torches. His arms and legs were like the color of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a great crowd. So this is so after sort of this semi-fast and hardship, he gets a linen. The altar says that linen as an angelic guy was a cue picked up from Ezekiel. So that, to Linda's point earlier, this is sort of a link between the two. And this is clearly a supernatural figure. Altar's comment again, while this figure, who must be Gabriel, has been described as a certain man because his form is anthropomorphic, he is dazzling and monumental, from his jewel-like body and refulgent face, and eyes to roaring voice, right? Like there's a divine beings have this image where it's sort of human-like and sort of not. That, by the way, is reminiscent of the Haftorah from Monday morning. Was that Monday? From the first day, from the beginning of Ezekiel. The beginning of Ezekiel says, that the similarly, vision came to me at the beginning of Ezekiel. He says, and then I saw something like 4 living creatures. They were of human form, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings, and their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the soles of a calf's foot. Just like Ezekiel sees these semi-human, semi-angelic figures, so too Daniel. Verse 7, and I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. The people who were with me did not see the vision. Yet a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide. Also different than typical, right? Usually people are able to see visions together. This, not so. Verse 8, as for me, I remained alone. And I saw this great vision, and no strength remained in me, and my bearing was shattered, for I retained no strength. Verse 9, and I heard the sound of his words, I was in a trance on my face to the ground, right? That's also sort of key to the whole thing, like that he's, to have the vision of God, he's in a trance and like doesn't have the strength even to stand, right? Like it physically affects him all, and everyone around him trembles. It's there's something happening. And look, a hand touched me, and he pulled me to my knees and to the palms of my hands. And he said to me, Daniel, beloved man, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand up where you are, for now I have been sent to you. And he spoke this thing to me, and I stood up shaking, and he said to me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your mind to understand and to afflict yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come through your words. And the prince of the kingdom of Persia was standing against me 21 days. And look, Michael, one of the leading princes, was coming to help me, and I remained there by the king of Persia. And I have come to let you understand what will befall your people in latter time. For there is yet a vision for the time. All right, so this is Daniel beginning to get his vision. Verse 12, when he says, fear not, Daniel, they set your mind to understand, to afflict yourself. That is ta'anit, that's like a fast, right? Authors note the prince of the kingdom of Persia. The probable reference is not to the Persian emperor, but to a celestial Tsar, who serves as the angelic patron of Persia. Though there are a couple of episodic hints of such a notion in early biblical literature, it basically reflects a new concept of history. Celestial meaning heavenly agents do battle with one another on behalf of the nations they patronize, and human agency is thus drastically reduced. So this is, Alder at least thinks this is the patron saints battling it out in the heavens. JSB agrees. This is the guardian angel of Persia. Michael is they say is a warrior angel, found in later Jewish and Christian literature. Including the book of Revelations, though of course, like this is the latest book written to make it into the Tanakh. So ideas like this that come late aren't anywhere else in the Tanakh after this, but will pop up in apocryphal writings, sometimes in rabbinic writings, or in the Christian Bible. And that's sort of the sense of guardian angels. Verse 15. And he spoke to me words of this sort. I put my face to the ground and I fell silent. And look, one in the likeness of a human being, again, this angelic figure, but looks like a person, was touching my lips. That's also reminiscent of the prophets like Isaiah, who his lips are touched and then is given the ability to prophesy. And I opened my mouth and spoke and said to him who stood before me, my Lord, not necessarily meaning God, right? It's sort of, that's in the lowercase L sense. My Lord, in the vision, my pangs overcame me, and I retained no strength. And how can the slave of my Lord speak with my Lord? And strength will not stand in me, and no breath is left in me. And Again, one like the semblance of a human being touched me and said, and made me strong. And he said, "Fear not, beloved man, for it is well with you. Be very strong." As he spoke with me, I grew strong and said, "Let my Lord speak, for you have made me strong." And he said, "Do you know why I have come to you? And now I shall go back and do battle with the prince of Persia. And as I go out, look, the prince of Greece is coming. But I shall tell you what is inscribed in the writ of truth, and there's no one sustaining me against all those, save Michael, your prince. And I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I took my stand to strengthen and to be a bastion for him. And now the truth I shall tell you." That'll be chapter 11. But the so this seems to be, I shall go back and do battle with the prince of Persia. These are the guardian angels of each people fighting against each other, it seems, up in heaven. As it were, right? That the guardian of the Israelites and the guardian of the Persians will see who wins, and then the Prince of Greece is coming. That is Alexander, sort of also coming to do battle with all of these kingdoms, right? Gabriel is speaking. Michael is, it seems to be the guardian angel of the people of Israel. So, pause. This is all wild stuff. It's designed to be wild stuff. And again, part of why Daniel never gets read. It is a different feel, partly because it feels geopolitical or is geopolitical, which dates it more than other things. Whereas the stories, again, say of King David or Judges and the like, feel like they're stand-ins for human behavior. This feels very specific. But as we'll see in chapter 11 and then chapter 12, especially chapter 11, sometimes people will read this out, even though it's referring to the events of his time. People will tend to read it as reflecting whatever time they're in, right? Like there are 4 kingdoms, and people will link those 4 kingdoms to modern powers and things like that. But Daniel isn't talking about that. Daniel's very specific. All right. We're going to stop there. My guess is we have 2 weeks left, because there's chapter 11, which is long, and chapter 12, which is short but important. It is 11 sort of continues in the spirit, but 12 is where you're going to get the only biblical reference to a resurrection of the dead. Like that's so it's all leading up to chapter 12 in that sense, because that is where like the real innovation in Jewish thought is going to come. But we'll get there.